Hello, Joe. Godless Granny here. Here's my responses to your 10 questions for atheists. Let's have a chat. Question 1. What label do I use for myself and what does it mean to me? I use the label atheist, although agnostic would probably be more accurate. To me, it means I don't believe in any gods. I don't believe any gods exist, but I am open to the possibility, should anyone ever provide evidence for the existence of a god. I use the atheist label for demographic reasons. Currently, in the United States, there are about 4% of people who identify as atheists, 3% who identify as agnostic, but 21% of the U.S. population is religiously unaffiliated. Politicians do not currently consider us a significant demographic, such that they find a need to address our political stances. But if we band together under one label, we are a significant portion of the population. Politicians are more likely to listen to us and consider our opinions if we do band together. Thus, I would like to see more unbelievers claim the atheist moniker, even if they need to clarify what type of atheist they are. Question 2. Yes, I did believe in a God. I was a Christian. I was raised Catholic until about the age of 7 and then agnostic, with my mother of the opinion that there was no God, but if there is a God, it's the Catholic God. I converted to being a Protestant at age 16. My faith meandered within Protestant beliefs from young earth to old earth, from Arminianism to Calvinism, to my own theology, wherein everyone would eventually be saved, either in this life or in the next. I suppose that might be universalism, although I never did stay in that belief long enough to really explore it. And then, finally, to atheism. Question 3. My family was always very divided on religion. One family member always leaned Catholic, but was never outspoken about that stance. Another member never showed any inclination toward religious belief until marriage. After marriage, this person was a practicing Catholic, but never made religion an issue. This person never talked about beliefs, so I was never certain what this person's thoughts were on the subject, and the person never indicated any desire to talk about it. 2 other family members were non-religious, one very vocal about it. I raised my children to believe, and all were adults when I deconverted. Of my 3 children, one is an atheist, one is a strong believer, and one expresses belief, but I'm uncertain as to what that belief is. My husband is still a believer, but I was the one that always drove the train on our church involvement. Since I stopped believing, he does believe, but he just watches an online service once a week. It's not like when I had us going to church twice on Sunday and to every church event. How did they react? 3 were glad that I finally saw reason. 5 expressed no opinions openly, though one expressed subtle hints at having a strong opinion. The only people who expressed negative opinions about my deconversion were several people I used to go to church with and I used to count as friends. Only one friend that I used to go to church with is still friends with me. Question 4. What convinced me that my religion was faulty was reflecting on the conversion of the Apostle Paul. If there was a God that wants everyone to believe in him, and he can appear to Paul and call him to follow, and he is omniscient, knowing what each individual needs to know in order to believe, why does he not do that for everyone? If he doesn't because he can't, he isn't omnipotent. If he doesn't because he doesn't want to, then you can't say that he wants everyone to believe, and yet that is what the Bible says. I was a Calvinist at the time, so free will wasn't an issue, as I didn't think God gave man free will to decide to follow. But if God did, why was it not a violation to appear to Paul and call Paul, but it is a violation of free will to call anyone else? This reflection on Paul also made me realize how self-centered the Calvinist theology is. even though they claim to be the most selfless people, claiming that they are all worthless without God. Their theology only makes sense from a self-centered perspective. Here's what I mean. Calvinism says that Jesus only died to save the elect. God chose the elect before the creation and predestined them to salvation. Salvation is only possible if God calls you, and once you are called, it is an irresistible call, and you will be saved. Thus, salvation is solely the work of God, by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, to the glory of God alone. But if you start thinking about unbelievers, God looks like a monster. How can God be glorified by destroying the many? After all, few are chosen. The way to life is narrow, and few find it. How can a God claim to be love, yet create billions of people that he has predestined to hell? How can a God claim to be just when he damns people to hell for being exactly what he created them to be? This was the second point that fractured my faith and took me from Calvinism to my own form of universalism. I don't think believers think about what it says about their God, that he knows people will be damned even before he makes them. Then he makes them anyway in a state that will eventually lead to their demise at best, or eternal torture at worst, depending on your viewpoint of hell. The final straw that broke the camel's back for me was Noah's Ark. Everything I know about God, I know from the Bible. Even in my short stint as a universalist, I still held to the inerrancy of the Bible. I believed that there were some things that might not happen until the next life, but somehow everything in the Bible would be true. But then my son told me that Noah's Ark was impossible. He started with the methane gas produced by the animals would have suffocated them all. He was right. But the fact that made me realize he was right was hearing Aaron Ra in a video at the Ark protest, saying that history disproved the flood. I knew immediately that not only was he right, but that I had known that all along. I had just never put it together. I knew from history classes that when studying ancient history, there isn't a break where the entire population of the earth vanishes, all wiped out in a single event. Yes, that kind of thing did happen from time to time in a single civilization, but there is no time in human history where that happens simultaneously around the globe. And thus I knew that there could not have been a global flood. At that point, I let go of biblical inerrancy. And once I let go of inerrancy, a whole new world opened up to me. A world in which I could question everything. I began to learn so much more about the world around me and all the subjects that I had refused to even look at if they didn't agree with the Bible. Question 5. What argument do I find most convincing or thought-provoking for the existence of a deity? Probably explaining how the universe began. While the lack of this knowledge really isn't evidence of God, it's just an appeal to ignorance. If we don't know it, God must have done it. I also can't respond to how did it happen. So while this argument has me thinking, it has no appeal to be convincing either. I do see the power in the emotional appeals that some believers make. I saw one try to convince me that there is a God that loves me personally. He had nothing to back his claim except Bible verses, but nonetheless, despite a complete lack of evidence, he made a powerful emotional appeal. I can see why I fell for it as a teenager. Question 6. I would like to see non-theists be more charitable. I myself fail in this respect sometimes. I follow Vice Rhino and Paulogia religiously, as I think they are two of the best examples in the community at being able to get their points across, throw in sarcasm where appropriate, and yet still be charitable. We need to keep in mind that these people believe these things so strongly that to challenge this is to challenge their very identity. To get someone to think critically of their own viewpoint is a difficult thing, so I think we all, myself included, need to be patient and let people digest our points. On the other hand, it was the banner at the Ark encounter that said, "Genocide and Incest Park," raising my ire that got me to listen to Aaron Ra. My intent was to refute what he was saying, but after hearing him, I knew he was right. So this is not an easy thing. There is a time and a place to be offensive, and sometimes being offensive is the way to get the attention needed to get your point across. But if we want to make rational appeals, we also need to keep our own emotions in check. Question 7. I found my local atheist community only shortly before the pandemic. I didn't get a chance to really get involved with them before the pandemic, and they have not met since. I hope we get back together again when it's over. They did talk about some things that they were doing, like protests on gay and trans rights. I would like to be involved in more things like this. Question 8. I'm with Vice Rhino on the problematic phrasing of this question. Why add the "for fun" part? Is torturing babies okay as long as your motivation isn't fun? I know Christians add that part because in the Bible God killed lots of babies. He did it in the flood, in killing all the firstborn in Egypt, and in the cleansing of Canaan. But because God didn't do it for fun, that makes it okay? Once you see the problem in the phrasing of your question, it answers itself. Yes, moral statements express truth. We all know that torturing babies is wrong. The fact that Christians feel the need to tack on the "for fun" part shows that they know this is wrong, and they have to add something to excuse the behavior of their God that they know is wrong. If they know what their God is doing is wrong, then said God can't be the source of that knowledge. So where does that knowledge come from? Instinct. Survival of our species is instinctive. It isn't limited to humans. We aren't the only species that protect our young. If a God was the source of this truth, how did other animals get this truth? If God gave it to the animals, why do only some animals have this instinct? Some animals eat their young, not a very good survival instinct. Evolution, which has no moral goals, is the only explanation that makes sense to explain that variety. It is true regardless of what people believe. You might find an outlier or two that believes otherwise, but that doesn't change the truth of the statement. I think it expresses intuition or instinct. This is an area of moral philosophy where I am weak. I'm still working on understanding how something is true, regardless of what people think. For example, slavery. It has always been wrong, even when the majority of people said otherwise. I'm sure there are things that we accept that one day reason will prove we were wrong on. So how could we have thought these right? I'm not sure how to answer these yet. Question 9. Probably Buddhism. I don't know enough about Buddhism to be definitive on any point, but what little I know of the religion, it seems the most peaceful and accepting of reality, while finding a place for spirituality. Question 10. I would have to say Sean McDowell. He seems to be the most tolerant of really listening to atheist questions and truly considerate of the atheist viewpoint. Unlike people like Frank Turek, who pay lip service to listening to atheist arguments, but then completely misrepresent those arguments to the point where you have to wonder, were they really listening and they intentionally got it wrong because the real point is more difficult to refute? Or were they just pretending to listen while pulling up their pat answers to the general topic? It's ironic that I find Sean one of the most honest and open, as it was his dad, Josh McDowell, that I blame for keeping me trapped in theology for as long as I was. It was his dad's book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, that convinced me of the inerrancy of the Bible. Whenever I doubted my faith, I always returned to this foundation, that the Bible was true. One specific claim that Josh McDowell made that deceived me for decades was that there has never been an archaeological discovery that has disproven the Bible. When I first heard that from McDowell when he spoke at my university in 1980, I had no way of verifying it. The internet wasn't a thing yet. The university did have computers, but at that time only computer majors were allowed to use them, as you had to know computer language to be able to do it. The Macintosh, the first computer for general public use, was not yet invented. I could go to the library, but what would I look for? Archaeological finds that disprove the Bible? I would not have found such a book. Nor did I have enough doubt to seek to verify his claim. He had sources listed in his book, and that was sufficient for me at the time. Since then, I have learned that not only is that statement not true now, it wasn't even true when he wrote it. I do think the senior McDowell thought it was true. I don't think he was trying to be deceptive, but I do think that he was sloppy in his research, resulting in him making false claims, which at the time were difficult to verify, but which we can now easily refute. Thanks, Joe, for your questions and the opportunity to respond. I hope this was helpful. Live your life.